Hi, and welcome to Thought Arouser. We're talking this week about the question, what would I like to ask God for in the coming year? We are fast approaching the last half of December. And so as we're thinking about the next year, we're going to explore a couple of things in today's segment to prompt and arouse some thinking as you approach 2025, next year. A few years ago, I was in a congregational meeting. We were having a budget hearing. And at those hearings, people were invited to make observations, to ask questions, recommendations. It was a listening thing on the part of the church leadership. And one of those meetings was going quite well. And a gentleman in the congregation stood and he said, I need to tell you right up front, I don't object to anything that's in this budget. I think it's all in line. My question tonight is, where is God in this budget? Everything I see here, we can do. We know we can do this. And I'm just wondering if there's anything in this budget that is there because we need God to be involved next year. And he smiled and sat down, and it was just kind of, oh, it's an interesting thought. The staff was tasked with talking about it the next week. And we ended up in that organization, I was on staff, we ended up placing in the budget up to 7% of our total God projects, things that we would do if God provided over and above what had been in the budget that had been approved. In that same line of thinking, I want to ask this year, what would you like to ask God for in the coming year that would require for him to be involved in what's going on? We're going to look at 5 prayers from the Bible, very, very briefly. Going to look at a few historic prayers, which will probably spark memories that you have of other things you've read about. And then between now and the time we meet on what would you like to ask God for next year? I don't expect that you'll have final things. Some of them will come as you go. The first, believe it or not, is the Lord's Prayer, the prayer that Jesus used as an example when his disciples asked him to teach them how to pray. He mentions daily provision. Give us this day our daily bread. He mentions forgiveness. Forgive us our debts, our trespasses. And near the end, protection from temptation. Lead us not in temptation, but deliver us from evil. So in his example, the Lord has some things that he teaches his disciples. Ask for these things. Moses in the Old Testament prayed for Israel. He came down off Mount Sinai, discovered, oh my word, God was about ready to say, that's it. You guys are disqualified. Head for the showers. And Moses pleaded with God to preserve his name and his character. Might be a fun word study to do sometime. For the sake of your name, please, God, do not destroy Israel, even though they're disobedient. Moses prayed for his countrymen, his people. Hannah prayed for a child. She was barren, and she prayed fervently, poured out her soul before the Lord in anguish, and requested that God grant her petition for a son. Jabez is a very familiar prayer. His name, it's associated with pain, but he asked for 3 things. He asked God to bless him, he asked God to enlarge his territory, and he sought God's protection from evil. That's a prayer that I frequent. It's a legitimate prayer. And I love at the end of it, it says, and the Lord granted his request. Number 5, David sought God's mercy. Lord, I need your mercy. I request your mercy. He confessed his sin. He asked for pardon. He requested cleansing, the restoration of the joy of his salvation. And then he asked for, and I like this one the best, a renewed spirit and God's presence evident to him. Maybe on a very personal level, that's something we might want to ask God for, applied to our own situations. Historically, I hopped online and I said, give me a handful. And I liked some of what the search engine found. The Pilgrims sought divine intervention from threats. They were the new kids on the continent, and they were not welcomed. And they prayed for relief from drought and for protection from threats. They were unwelcomed, and they prayed, often accompanied with fasting and humiliation before God. Reverend Thomas Prince's prayer in Boston's Old South Meeting House in the 1700s, he prayed, "Send thy tempest, Lord, upon the water, scatter the ships of our tormentors." That prayer was followed by a hurricane that destroyed the French fleet. God answered. In 1775, the Continental Congress prayed for divine intervention. They urged colonists to confess their sins, to seek forgiveness, and then the prayer requested divine guidance during that critical phase of the American Revolution. Divine guidance. I'm in on that one. President Washington's Thanksgiving proclamation in 1789 called for gratitude to God for the nation's blessings and protection. Maybe that would apply to a church, to a business, to a family. Gratitude for his blessings and prayer for his protection. And one more, did you know that Abraham's second inaugural address ended in prayer? He called for healing and a reconciliation after the Civil War. And that was what his prayer, he emphasized divine judgment and mercy. Those are 5 major, broad brush, historical, and a few examples from prayer. I love how Paul prayed for the recipients of his letters. I think my favorite is probably Philippians chapter 1, starting at verse 9. And I pray all of his letters started with grace and peace, part of his prayer for them. So as you're thinking about that, go back Matthew 7, verses 7 through 11, and then look at a few different translations, including the New Living Translation, put in terms that we use today. Thanks. We'll see you soon.